if we're looking for our governments to save us, if we're waiting for them to ban stuff before we could feel good about making a change, we're going to continue to get sick in that process. We have the ability to do our own research. We have the ability to make our own decisions. We can decide what goes in and on our body. If we can control that, especially in our own homes, we can control the outcome that we're looking for, which is better health.
Welcome to the Radical Health Rebel podcast. I'm your host, Lee Brandon. This work started for me several decades ago when I started to see the impact I could make on people, helping them to identify the root cause of their health problems that no doctor could figure out, including serious back, knee, shoulder and neck injuries, acne and eczema issues, severe gut health problems, even helping couples get pregnant after several IVF treatments had failed. And it really moves me to be able to help people in this way. And that is why I do what I do and why we have this show. Welcome to this week's episode of the Radical Health Rebel podcast. On this week's episode, I have a very special guest, Michael Rubino, who is an air quality expert, environmental wellness advocate, podcaster, and author. With a background in construction and remediation, Michael has become America's go-to source for information, services, and products to create healthier living through cleaner indoor air. Stay tuned as we learn more about how we can bridge the gap between our homes and our health with Michael's expertise. Michael Rubino, welcome to the Radical Health Rebel podcast. Thanks for coming on the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to this, Michael. And to kick things off, could you share your own journey and what led you to become interested in air quality, and more importantly, how you became interested in how air quality affects health?
Yeah, so my dad's been a restoration contractor since I'm 5 years old. So essentially, people have fires every once in a while, unfortunately. And my dad would go in and basically rebuild the houses, and restore them after a fire. And, if you know a little bit about fires, firefighters come in, they put it out with water. So it ends up being a water damage situation as well, with mold and bacteria, arsenic, all kinds of things you would be concerned about. So it's very much so an environmental reconstruction project. And I learned a lot growing up from my dad, just all things construction. It really wasn't until Hurricane Sandy hit the Northeast that I started taking an interest in what I do. And that's because Hurricane Sandy hits right as I pretty much get out of college. I go back home working for my dad, trying to revitalize his 1990s company with brand new branding and marketing. And as I'm going door to door, kind of learning about, what people are experiencing and what sort of problems they have with their home that we can help them fix, I started to notice a pattern of people not feeling well. And this is, Hurricane Sandy decimated tens of thousands of homes. As you walk into people's homes, it didn't matter how old they were. We had kids that were affected. We had the elderly that was affected, people in their mid 30s, mid 40s. We really got into this situation where, unfortunately, I had no choice but to kind of divulge myself into the situation and figure out what are these molds or bacterias that could be making somebody sick? And more importantly, how do we get rid of them? And, 2013, the conversation starts to change around these toxins that can be produced by both molds and bacterias. And so what I had to do was essentially try to figure out how to remove these things from the home. And there was no process on it. There was no literature on it. The only literature on it was really about how mycotoxins impacted the food supply. You had doctors going around talking about the presence of mycotoxins and, how this can impact people's health. And here I am. There's no literature, no education in the entire industry on how do you remove mycotoxins from homes and buildings. I, at the ground floor, just had to figure it out. Through this remarkable journey, it's been roughly a little more than 10 years now. I have seen thousands of people being sick inside their home. There are thousands more that have contacted us asking for help. And so when you really put all these things together, it seems to me like it's a pretty big missing link. And if we actually take this information and we look at from the global health scale here, um, we see the problems in homes and buildings. We see people getting sicker. Today, we have never been sicker than we are today, right? So over 60% of the global population deals with at least one chronic condition. That's a pretty big number. And how's that possible if we have advancements in medicine, advancements in technology? We should be healthier than ever before. I mean, with all the organic produce we have available these days, with the better clean drinking water we have these days. And so for me, as I started really diving into this and figuring out how to help people, I started to zoom out and see just how big of an impact air quality has on our health. And so that's why I'm here.
So what was your dad had this restoration business, but kind of what was your background before you got involved in that?
Well, I was fresh out of college,
right?
So I had no background. I my education was in business and marketing. I started walking into these homes working for my dad. I pretty much got the experience working for my dad. And granted, I was 12 years old. In summers, I would go to work for him and sweep up and do basic labor things. And that's how I kind of stayed connected with my dad, because my dad worked a lot, growing up. And so I would connect with him on the job sites and take an interest in all the amazing things that he was doing. And watching homes get built was so fascinating to me as a kid. But in that experience of growing up around it, I learned quite a bit. And so the second I started doing this professionally, of course, I had my dad at speed dial, being able to ask him any questions about the structure or anything that's something I didn't learn yet. But it really was trial and error in the field over the past 10 plus years that allowed me to kind of create the process that we use today across, the United States.
So if I've understood you correctly, your dad had this restoration business. You used to help out, from the age of 12. You left college. You studied business and marketing, but then did you do something separate from your dad's business, or was it part of that business?
So when I came into my dad's business, I basically was VP of marketing. That was my title coming right into the business. But my dad had a small business, maybe about 20, employees. There was this little office in the basement of Brooklyn, New York. And when I'm in that office and I'm trying to figure out how do we create new marketing content, kind of revitalize his business, it quickly became apparent to me that I needed to actually go out on the streets, meet with people, create these estimates, almost put myself in the sales position to really understand what is it that people are looking for? What is it that people actually want them to solve? And what are the limitations of that, right? Because we have to put together the right messaging. And in that process, I started, consulting with my dad. People are claiming that they're sick. And, I have to remind you, this is an era where when you had mold in your place, you just painted over it. You just threw bleach on it, right? This wasn't a very well-known thing that mold can cause issues. And so going back to this era, my dad for the first time was learning too, like this, really? They're complaining about health issues? Well, we'll have to dive deeper. Oh, wow. Yeah, that stuff doesn't look good. Yeah, maybe that's what it is. Oh, maybe it's getting into the HVAC system. It was literally like trying to solve a puzzle where there was really no information. This was a brand new puzzle. We had to kind of figure it out on our own. And it was actually through that process utilizing lab testing. So we'd have people come in, take tests, look at the lab results, figure out what can we do to lower those results, come back in, have them come back in and retest. And it was really through that trial and error process that we developed the process that now works every time to essentially improve the quality of air people are breathing, looking at things like water damage, mold, and bacteria as one of the major culprits that affect the air quality. So it's not ideal, but I felt like I had nowhere to turn other than to try to, figure this out on my own.
So it sounds to me like, you came in to focus on the marketing, but then once you started asking questions, you realized there was something else that you wasn't really addressing that was really important to the people that had been, had their homes damaged. Would that be right?
That's exactly right.
Interesting. So just moving on a bit further. So you kind of mentioned a few little things there, but going a little bit deeper, how does the quality of air that we breathe impact our health? And in particular, what's the link between air quality and perhaps autoimmunity?
So I think the main reason that air quality is so important, the average human being takes about 20,000 breaths per day. You're consuming about enough air to fill up a normal size swimming pool. And if you were to take a particle counter around your house right now, you would see there's a lot of particles in the air. Now, you don't normally see them because you look through them, right? Air is invisible. The only time you realize that there's actually particles floating in the air that you're constantly breathing in is when that ray of light refracts off the dust in the air and you look at it and go, wow, that's a lot of dust in my air. The problem is what's in that dust is really important. If you go on the American Lung Association website right now, they have a great article on size matters. And the real issue is anything smaller than 10 microns poses the greatest human health risk. Now we're talking mold, bacteria, viruses, toxins, allergens, right? All these things that are tiny. And the reason being is because every time you breathe them in, they go past our self-defense mechanisms, right? Because they're too small. They bypass our lungs and they enter our bloodstream. So essentially, if it's too small, you're not only breathing it in, you're also ingesting it. Now it's getting into the bloodstream. Now it's impacting organs. And with mold, certain species of mold could be toxic. Certain species of mold could be allergenic. Certain species of mold are pathogenic. And each one will create its own host of symptoms. Now we get to autoimmunity, for example. I'm not going to go out on a limb and say mold is causing autoimmunity because we don't have enough information to flat out say that. But I will point out that it's very interesting that anybody who has Lyme disease or other co-infections, anybody who has rheumatoid arthritis, anybody who has lupus or pretty much any autoimmune disease, SIBO, pick one and name one, they have a sensitivity to mold for some reason. And whether it's causing autoimmunity, whether it's one of the causes of autoimmunity, or whether it's exacerbating autoimmunity and bringing out the symptoms, I don't think it matters because as long as we're looking at air quality and looking at ways to improve it, one thing that's profound for me is I've seen every single person improve their air quality, find some relief in whatever the existing condition they have going on. And that's really interesting. We're seeing PANS and PANDAS. I know that's not autoimmunity. It's a kid's psychiatric disorder. But we're seeing these kids get more disruptive in moldy environments. We're seeing, people with Lyme disease, they get knocked out by mold. As a matter of fact, most Lyme doctors will tell you that you have to treat the mold before you could treat the Lyme, which is a really interesting phenomenon. We're seeing with the amazing work Dr. Dale Bredesen is doing, we're seeing that mold toxins are to blame for what's called inhalational Alzheimer's, for the early onset of dementia. And if you go on changetheairfoundation.org's website right now, you'll see an amazing graphic. It's called Conception to the Grave under the Resources tab. And it shows you how it impacts us at each stage of life, from pregnant mothers to babies to children, adolescents, all the way through elderly. And it's really interesting to see because for me and for probably many people listening to this, the connection between air quality and health, it really hasn't been made. With the exception of COVID-19, was the first time we really, as a society, understood air transmission and how this stuff travels through the air. Other than that, we really haven't ever thought about air quality. And for how sick we are today as a civilization, it's probably time we start looking at that.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it would be fair to say that, what's in the air that's causing problems is toxic to humans, right? I think that would be fair to say.
It would, yes.
Yeah. And again, if you compare it, if you said to someone, okay, the food that you're eating is toxic, I mean, sadly, most of it is. Most people just don't know it. But if most people understood that the food that they were eating was toxic, the first thing they would think is, well, I need to stop eating that. But with the air, if you say, well, your air's toxic, most people would say, well, there's nothing I can do about it, right? But that's where you come in, obviously, because there are solutions which we'll come on to. Now, one of the things as well that's important, I think, is looking at because you're predominantly looking at indoor air environments. Why is it that the quality of our air indoors is the most important thing when it comes to our health? Amir was a 42-year-old professional man suffering from acne. He was overweight, suffering from low confidence, and he had very low energy levels when he first came to see me. He was also spending £400 per month on products to cover up his acne. His skin was very oily, his face and scalp were covered in acne, and he worried that it might start to affect his work. Amir was a sugar lover, and it took him some time to wean himself off of sugar, but slowly over time, Amir made the necessary changes. Upon testing his gut microbiome, it was discovered that he did have a minor imbalance of gut microbes, including Staphylococcus aureus, which is often linked to skin conditions. He had hormonal imbalances, which would have affected his energy levels, and a number of food sensitivities that may have been causing his acne. Amir was also given supplementation to help rebalance his gut microbiome and his hormones. And within a few weeks, his skin improved to the point where he had clear skin for the first time in 30 years. If you would like to achieve the same kind of result as Amir, you can now follow a comprehensive step-by-step guide in my brand new book, Eliminating Adult Acne for Good, available now from all major online bookstores and via my website at www.bodycheck.co.uk/books.
Well, I think mainly because we spend 90% of our time indoors. And, I think everybody can relate to that. I am home right now having this podcast with you. You're at home right now. COVID has shifted us from office spaces to our, home office spaces. And we're spending more time than ever before inside these homes. And why it matters, how indoor air quality, and I'm not going to say that outdoor air quality doesn't matter, because outdoor air quality can affect indoor air quality. But to make the biggest change, you have to look at where's the biggest common denominator you can actually improve. And that's going to be the indoor environment where you spend 90% of your time. Even if you're not working at your home, you're certainly sleeping at home, spending 8 hours. That's a third of your day right there. And so when you start to really take a look at this, yes, we have to do something about air quality. But it's actually smarter to start indoors than outdoors, because you can control that. Outdoor air quality, there's a lot at stake there. I mean, when you have forest fires, ripping through the world, it makes it a pretty big challenge. I mean, there's a lot of systemic things that need to change in order to really help the outdoor air quality. But for right now, I mean, one thing that we all can do is take a look around our own homes and see, how do we improve that? And I think starting there makes a tremendous impact on you and your family.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you're right that, today, in today's society, certainly the last 10 years, people have started to spend more and more time at home. And obviously since 2020, a lot of people have been doing, as you said, a lot more work from home as well. I mean, I was already moving in that direction prior to 2020, but I've pretty much made the shift almost 100% to working from home. Probably I do a little bit of work outside, but very, very rarely these days. So, you're right. It's definitely where most of us spend most of our time, but it's also the space that we can control the most. I guess the other challenge that a lot of people have, if they do still work in an office or a factory or wherever it might be, they have less control over the air that they breathe. The other thing, while you were talking as well about outside, obviously volcano eruptions. I know, I don't live near a volcano. I suppose Iceland is probably the closest active volcano to where I am. But if a volcano goes off, obviously that sprays a hell of a lot of stuff into the air that can linger for a very long time as well, right?
That's exactly right. Yeah. And so, if you live near a volcano and a volcano goes off, I mean, you're really going to want to figure out a way to create some positive pressure inside the home to push particles away and out. You're obviously going to want to keep doors and windows closed. I mean, that's if you're not in an evacuation zone where you have to get out and you could actually stay. But it's, it's going to spew out hot lava, right? It's going to burn pretty much everything in its pathway. It's going to release tons of particles in the air, and all that ash and things of that nature. That's not good to breathe in, especially if it's affecting, nearby structures where it could be burning plastic and things of that nature. You're talking about, lots of chemicals that get released into the air that you could be breathing in. What's interesting about air quality itself is people don't understand it, right? That, we understand that there's pretty much three forms of matter, right? Gas, liquid, particle, solid. Pretty much what we're really worried about is the particle side of things, because even when things are a liquid, even when things are a gas, right? It's still a particle. And if these particles have an ability to enter our bloodstream just by breathing, and put this in mind, I mean, a lot of particles can enter your body with just one breath. I mean, we're talking the potential of hundreds of millions. It is really important that, we kind of look at this from a different perspective so we can really plan for the worst. And if we can plan for the worst, then we can really do something and control it. Forest fires, volcano eruptions, these are things that we actually can future-proof against in terms of making sure that we have equipment in our house that's creating positive pressure. We have air filters running, trying to basically keep particles from coming inside the home. And then anything that does make its way in, if there's just too much velocity, right? We still have ways of removing it so that our bodies and our lungs are not the air filter.
Yeah, it's quite interesting. I think it was last year. So obviously I'm in the UK, and we had, for want of a better phrase, a sandstorm. And everyone had like this thick layer of dust that just appeared. I have balconies. They're just covered in this like dark, thick dust. And I'll stand to be corrected, but if I remember rightly, they were saying that came from the Sahara Desert. I mean, I don't know exactly how many miles away, but it's probably getting on for 1,000 or more miles away. And you think, wow, the air connects us all, right? It's almost like you can't really hide from anything that's in our environment.
No, you're right. And, you look at that from that perspective too. I want to kind of help people understand this a little better. Someone once asked me, well, mold's been around forever, so how could it make me sick, right? I said, well, let me ask you a question. If you went in the middle of a sandstorm and you're just breathing in tons of sand's not really toxic, right? But if you were breathing in tons of sand, do you think you would feel good, or do you think you would get sick? You'd probably get sick because all your mucous membranes would be clogged with sand. You probably would have sand in your lungs, and it would be pretty hard to breathe. I bet you would probably develop some sort of infection in the lung because now your lungs are going to be filling up with fluid trying to get rid of the sand, right? Your mucous membranes, you're going to have sinus issues. I mean, this will mess you up. So why are we thinking about it from the wrong perspective, right? The right perspective is too many particles, especially ones smaller than 10 microns that can enter our bloodstream. That is what we're concerned about. So we need to be concerned about controlling the environment indoors for a very specific reason, because we have to make sure when sandstorms happen, we don't start breathing in a heightened amount of particulate matter that we normally wouldn't. When fires happen, right? We don't want to be breathing in all this different smoke, volcano eruptions, or even when water damage happens and we start to grow mold and bacteria in our walls, right? These are things that we just want to be more mindful of, because if we are aware of it, we can be in control of it. But if we don't know that this is such an important thing to human health, and let's face it, many of us really do not know, we do not think about this, well, then guess what? We're not in control, because if you don't have knowledge, you can't have responsibility. And if you don't have both those, you cannot have control.
Yeah, I mean, I'll just add to that as well. You're talking about, mold or fungus. Well, fungus secrete mycotoxins that can dissolve stone. So why would you not think that that could possibly do you damage, you know? And you could say, why have they been around for so long? Because they're very, very good at protecting themselves.
Yeah, mold is kind of like the cockroach of the fungus kingdom. It's actually really interesting. People sometimes will think that, well, if I've got some mold in my wall because of a roof leak, well, if I just fix the roof, the mold will go away. It'll die. No, it won't. It's going to stay there. It's going to stay there until you physically remove it. Just like how, cockroaches don't just die, right? You got to actually figure out where they're coming in from and get and remove them. There's always a problem that is occurring inside the home that you have to identify, the source, as we call it. And when you identify the source and you fix it and you remove the organisms that are basically living and feeding off of this problem, you now will have better quality of air. When it comes to mold specifically, and I know I'm beating up on mold, we'll get to bacteria too. When you have mold growing in a location, it's constantly reproducing. And people have a misunderstanding with mycotoxins. So first off, the FDA limits mycotoxins in our food supply. Been doing this for a long time. But however, the EPA has not picked up on the fact that mycotoxins are a problem in homes and buildings and impact the air quality. Now, how do we know they impact the air quality? How do they know? We know it's not just in our food supply. Well, because we've tested homes. We've picked up mycotoxins in the dust of homes. We understand that certain species of mold produce mycotoxins. What makes them produce mycotoxins? Well, the greatest theory that we have is that when mold feels threatened, it's a self-defense mechanism, kind of like how a skunk will spray you if it feels threatened, right? It's a self-defense mechanism. Well, why does mold feel threatened inside of our homes? There are over 100,000 different species of mold. And if I have a mold like, let's say, Aspergillus, growing in a location, we know that in order for it to continue to grow and colonize, it needs moisture. Well, every other mold will also need that same moisture. So you're going to have Aspergillus, you might have Penicillium, and you might have Stachybotrys. And you know what they're trying to do individually? They're trying to kill each other so that they can take over the real estate. This becomes survival of the fittest in terms of the fungal community. And we're innocent bystanders to that. And it's not like we're threatening the mold. Mold doesn't even know we exist. But the mold is fighting other molds because they're trying to take over that real estate. They need that moisture to grow and thrive. And just like any organism on this planet, it is survival of the fittest. The game is to survive. And I think it's really important that we take a look at mycotoxins. As you mentioned, they can melt the stone. Well, they're known to be carcinogenic. They're known to cause all kinds of health issues, right? So if we know this already, if it's already in medical journals and medical literature, if we already know the FDA regulates it for this specific reason, why aren't we looking at this in terms of the air quality inside of our homes? And furthermore, I think we all have learned from COVID that air transmission is the greatest route of exposure. If you've got something in the air, it is going to contaminate far faster and infect far quicker than if it's contaminating a food supply. So therefore, we are much more likely to get sick from it being in our homes than by worried about the peanuts that we're eating, right? Because peanuts is one of those moldy foods, by the way. So we have to really start to position ourselves around this, because if we don't, what I see happening is we continue to get sicker and sicker. I mean, 10 years ago, I could say we have never been sicker than we are today. And it was true 10 years ago. And guess what? It's true again today. And we're going down the wrong path here, because the only reason we can continue to be sicker and sicker is because the reason we are getting sicker and sicker has not been discovered yet.
Interesting. So I know you were saying before we started recording that you grew up in New York, right?
Yes.
So were you in New York in 2001?
I was in New York in 2001.
And you probably know the story of Donna Summer. Do you know Donna Summer?
I know Donna Summer.
Yeah. So, she died of cancer, and she was saying she blamed it on all the toxins that came out from the buildings, the 3 buildings that collapsed, which could potentially be a whole nother podcast.
Yes.
But obviously, she believes that all the toxins that came out of those buildings are actually what gave her cancer. I don't know what your thoughts are on that.
Well, I mean, it is obviously that was not a good situation on many different levels. The amount of dust that came out of New York City, I mean, people were experiencing it hundreds of miles away in New Jersey, hundreds of miles away in Pennsylvania. I mean, that thing spread in all directions. It was like a cloud of particles that literally enveloped that entire area. And you at that time, people knew absolutely nothing about air quality. I mean, nothing. I mean, at least we know a little bit more today. When there were forest fires in Canada not too long ago, everybody was, the media was telling you, close your windows, don't go outside, go buy air purifiers, right? So at least the knowledge is becoming a little more aware than it was back in 2001. In 2001, there was no knowledge. I mean, people went to work the next day. And that's part of this issue. Do I think people could have developed cancer if they were that close to it and breathing it in that frequently? Absolutely. I mean, you're talking arsenic, you're talking forever chemicals. I mean, think about all these different building materials and all these different floors of a building that completely became clouds of particles that enveloped. I mean, we're talking millions and millions of people that were breathing in poor air quality for a pretty extended period of time. I remember looking up as a kid, and it was, I mean, the color of the sky was crazy. You had fog and particles, and it was like an orange haze, that basically covered the area, and it was for weeks. So that much particles entering that many human beings for that long. Nobody was wearing masks. I mean, nobody knew better. And I think, that damage is done and it's hard to reverse.
Yeah. I know. So my dad was a plumber and a heating engineer for 60 years. And he worked openly with asbestos for most of that time. And it wasn't until, I can't remember exactly, maybe the last 15, 20 years of his career that, they banned asbestos in the UK. I'm not sure what other countries did, or I'm sure most countries have banned it now. But obviously a lot of people, or certainly people my dad knows that he used to work with, have died because of inhaling asbestos. And again, it's not something you could necessarily, I suppose you could see the dust, but I mean, my dad used to saw through asbestos and, no mask, no protection equipment at all. I mean, it's amazing he survived all that, really. But I just said that just to kind of highlight, how ignorant we have been over the years in terms of the dangers of air quality. And it's, it's great that people like yourself are around now to kind of warn people of the dangers.
Yeah. And, when you look at asbestos and lead, the things that really disturb me is we just make new versions of asbestos. We just make new versions of lead. I mean, let's take a look at Teflon and forever chemicals. Teflon comes out. It's the greatest thing ever. The CEO that creates Teflon is talking about how you could paint it up, paint it on trees to waterproof trees. This thing's amazing. Let's use it everywhere. And then boom, we realize it's killing us, right? These particles are breaking apart, getting into our food. We're inhaling them. We're ingesting them. They're contaminating everything we cook with. And, we go, oops, sorry. Enter in forever chemicals. We got all these other chemicals we can use in lieu of Teflon. And we just go down the path and we start using all these things. And then we're right back at the same boat. Oh, that's not good either. Now we need to ban, chemicals. It's like, we have all these marketing materials, BPA free, right? Like BPA. Okay. So we just created BPB, right? We just literally substitute one disaster for another disaster for another disaster. And then we wonder why we're not feeling well. And, it's crazy to think that, we haven't really quite figured it out, that when we use some of these synthetic materials, these synthetic materials run a risk of entering our bodies, either through ingestion, inhalation, depending on the size of the particle, that inhalation can double back as then ingestion. And then the dermal exposure too, right? And so what we want to do as human beings is we want to control the controllables, right? Unless we all want to sit here and riot against forever chemicals and all these different things that the chemical manufacturing industries are continuously putting out and really shoving down our throats with amazing convenience marketing. Look how convenient this is. You don't have to scrub your dishes anymore. And unless we're going to lobby against that and fight against that, what we could do is we could stop buying them. We could buy stuff that maybe it's not as convenient, but it's a little healthier, a little safer. We can control the air quality that we have inside of our own homes. We can, make sure that the particles that these products emanate are going inside of an air filter and not inside of our lungs. I mean, this is how we get in control of this. But we have to be educated, right? I think that's the biggest thing is if none of us know that this is a problem, that this is slowly impacting us, we're not going to know to do something about it. And I hope if anybody's learned anything so far today, it's just that fact. We have to do more research. If you want to know how I got into this industry and how I became the person that I am today, it's because I started asking questions. Well, why is this? And part of the story I didn't tell you about when I started in my career is a lot of these homes that I walked into where people were complaining of health effects, they were supposedly already remediated, right? Hurricane Sandy comes in, FEMA comes in. Basically, everybody's writing checks to try to restore this area. Insurance companies are going bankrupt with how much money they have to cover in such a massive amount of losses at the same time. FEMA comes in, they're writing checks too. They're trying to basically keep everybody afloat. But everybody from the US comes in and takes advantage of that. You have people flying into the area, picking people off the street, putting t-shirts on them, paying them cash, and everybody's going in and ripping out and, quote unquote, restoring homes. Well, what was the result of that? The result of that was poorly restored homes. The result of that was high levels of mold and bacteria and toxins in these homes after they were, quote unquote, fixed. And what I ended up finding out by asking why is this possible? How is this possible? What did they do? What should they have done? I uncovered something pretty massively. The entire restoration industry, at least in the US, and I know a little bit about the UK too, so I'm happy to touch on that. But this industry, they just want to do things based upon visual. But we're talking about microorganisms that you literally can't even see. You cannot see a mycotoxin. It is 50 to 100 times smaller than what the eye could see. So visual restoration is not enough. You need scientific restoration, right? And so that's how I developed the process of the company and testing validation to really see and really understand the impacts we're making. But for 40 years, still happens today. You've got companies coming in, they rip drywall out, they take some insulation out, they spray some chemicals. Those chemicals aren't good for you either. And then they leave. And they patch the wall back up and say, it looks like it never happened. Well, it looks like it never happened. And that's enough for some people because my house looks good again. But slowly you're breathing in all these particles that they missed. And that's been the problem. And uncovering that and figuring out how do we fix that, that has been pretty much the pinnacle of my career.
Yeah, just going back to something you mentioned, actually, Teflon. And, there might be someone listening to this thing, what do you mean Teflon, right? Because not everyone understands how toxic those materials are. And I would suggest if anyone's in any doubt about how toxic Teflon is, I would suggest watching the movie Dark Waters, which is about DuPont. I don't know if you're familiar with that movie, Michael.
I'm not familiar with the movie, but
it's worth a watch.
I did the deep dive rabbit hole on DuPont, and if anyone's a Danny DeVito fan, he does a whole SNL style skit of it where he pretends to be the Teflon, the DuPont CEO, and he kind of makes fun of him. It is a good watch, but the sad reality of it is that he misled people, and lots of lawsuits happened. Teflon is no longer being used. But like I said, we've just moved on to the next Teflon. And that's part of the problem is once we've experienced that convenience as consumers, other people say, well, people liked not having to scrub their dishes so hard. So let's figure out another way. Now that Teflon's banned, let's create the new Teflon that isn't banned, and they just go right on the road. And so the problem is that we don't know enough about these chemicals that they're treating things with. And we don't know how those particles, as they break apart, because they will, how does that impact the body as they enter into the body? I mean, to make things very clear, and I think simple for anybody to understand, if you want to be healthy, you have to worry about what goes in and on your body. And in could be drinking, in could be eating, and in is definitely breathing. And for so long, we forgot about the breathing part.
Yeah, I would add injecting as well into that one. But that's another controversial subject that we won't get into today. So, yeah, it's interesting. I know we're talking about air quality, but just going back to Teflon, I see on social media quite a lot of influencers, particularly kind of like cooking influencers, and they're advertising this. Oh, look at this new non-stick safe product, and then you look at the materials they use, and then they're just as toxic as the thing that they were supposed to replace, which is exactly what you were saying.
Yeah, we call that greenwashing, right? It's the new green thing. And these companies, they come out and they look at, they're very strategic, by the way, these chemical companies. They will look at certain things that fit within a box, and they'll be like, okay, so if we just have this in it, we can say this is safe because these things are known to be safe. And maybe we just put a little bit of this other stuff so that it works better, right? Meanwhile, they have to know that this other stuff is toxic, right? And I say they have to know because, I mean, when all of this stuff comes out, that all these different chemicals are no good for us and they're impacting our bodies. And by the way, I mean, just to understand how much they're impacting our bodies, there are babies being born in hospitals today with levels of forever chemicals in them right now, meaning it's transferring from the mother into the baby. I mean, this is crazy. We have kids that that were born probably a decade ago. They were having Teflon levels in them, right? And this is like after Teflon was banned. And that goes to show you these chemicals, the reason they're called forever chemicals is because they last forever. I mean, once they're in your body, it is very difficult to get them out. And when we look at this from this perspective, we see the impact. I mean, we've got a lot of reverse engineering to do. And it's scary to me that, all of our government regulations, they just let them modify the formula and come out with some new thing. And they don't have to prove that it's safe for humans before they do so. They really don't. Yeah. I mean, they just can say, here it is, here's the makeup, I'm going to make this and just start selling it. I mean, I think if we want to be smart, a smart civilization, we probably need to get to a level where we're saying, I need you to rigorously prove that this is going to be healthy for humans before you could put this product out. Because we have to change, we have to hold ourselves to a higher standard here.
Yeah, what a novel thought, eh? Prove that something's safe first before you give it to millions of people.
Not rocket science, but Yeah,
that's kind of crazy, isn't it, when you think of that? So moving on, what sort of symptoms and autoimmune conditions, I guess, have you seen people experience when they're kind of living in a toxic environment? Simon suffered acne as a teenager and at the age of 21 began taking the antibiotic erythromycin. The erythromycin didn't work, and as a last resort, he took Accutane for 4 to 5 months. Whilst Simon had some good days on Accutane, he still had breakouts. Simon was constantly anxious whenever the inevitable would happen and his skin would break out. From the age of 23 to 25, Simon went back on erythromycin, and again, the results were disappointing. Simon came to see me at the age of 31 and immediately changed his diet, especially reducing foods that would spike his blood sugar. He introduced some essential supplements, started drinking more water, and reduced his alcohol intake to almost zero. A couple of months in, Simon reported that his skin was as good as it had been in a long time, and he has now experienced the longest spell without breakouts since he was a teenager. So Simon is no longer anxious about experiencing breakouts because he knows he's in control of how his skin looks via his lifestyle choices, which has been very liberating for him. If you would like to achieve the same kind of results as Simon, you can now follow a comprehensive step-by-step guide in my brand new book, Eliminating Adult Acne for Good, available now from all major online bookstores and via my website at www.bodycheck.co.uk/books.
All right. So, I would say things range from acute to severe. Yeah. I have some clients right now that are patients of Dr. Dale Bredesen, where Dr. Dale Bredesen is picking up specific mycotoxins, and people are dealing with like severe memory loss, like diagnosed with Alzheimer's type memory loss. This isn't the brain fog you hear about where you're like, losing train of thought or, a little forgetful. This is like, I don't know who my husband is type of memory loss. And I think when we get to that level and all the work that he's doing is so amazingly important, he is literally reversing Alzheimer's. Now it's subtype 3 Alzheimer's, specific subtype of Alzheimer's, but he is literally reversing it by having people improve the quality of air they're breathing and removing toxins from their body. And I think it's remarkably interesting to see because honestly, he's really the first one to ever bring this point up that this is a problem. Moving away from that, we have the more, I want to say the other side of extreme. There's a woman that I helped. Her name was Shannon. She lived in Florida. Shannon had over 3 years slowly declined in health. She had in that 3-year span, she had 2 kids. Her last pregnancy, for whatever reason, she ended up getting really sick after delivering the baby. So much so that she actually had to have a GJ feeding tube installed into her lower intestine. Essentially, she's basically getting food through an IV. Shannon was probably bedbound 95% of the time. She really couldn't do much. A mother of 3, her husband's a firefighter. It was a very difficult and traumatic and sad situation for that family. What happened was, as she started to go through this decline, her home had several leaks. And her husband did the noble thing of, taking off of work, going in and fixing up the home. At that point in time, he had no idea that this could ever turn out this way. She had no idea that this could ever turn out this way. And so they thought they had fixed the problems. In that 3 years, her health gets worse and worse. She goes to 40 different doctors. In that time span, the only thing she gets misdiagnosed with all these different conditions, finally finds a doctor that says, hey, look, yes, you have the telltale symptoms of all these different things. Yes, you have POTS, but I actually think one of the biggest problems that you're experiencing is mold in your home. I'd like to, mold and bacteria and water damage in your home. I'd like to do some testing for mold, if that's all right with you. She desperate, of course. Yes, anything that can help me get my life back. By the way, before all of this, she was a nurse practitioner. So she was in the medical community and would actively help people get better, right? That was she, and she loved what she did. You fast forward, she's not doing well. The mycotoxins come back in her body off the charts. Okay, well, you're getting exposed somewhere. Well, you've been pretty much bedbound for 3 years. So obviously you have to be getting exposed in your home. I get in touch with her. We go out, we send a team in to go do extensive testing, figure out where this stuff's coming from. We find the exact species of mold producing the exact toxins that were found in her body. Eureka, we've made a correlation, which, by the way, is a very relatively new way of correlating the home with the body. I just want to point that out. It's not, that people aren't doing this all over the world. And once we made that correlation, we said, you need to move out. She rents an RV. She puts the RV on her property. She moves into the RV. So she goes from like a 2,500 square foot house to a 250 square foot trailer. Within 7 days of moving into that RV, I have not touched her house yet. Within 7 days of her moving into this RV, the GJ feeding tube is able to get removed for the first time in 3 years. For the first time in 3 years, she's bedbound maybe 50% of the time. She's starting to get her energy back. She's starting to feel better. we're now about 2 to 3 years after we had fixed her house, moved her back into her house. She is thriving again. Now, this is a crazy story. I mean, they said she had breast implant illness, right? And she had an explant. They said she had all these different things, and maybe there was a perfect storm happening. But what actually made her feel better for the first time in 3 years was her getting out of the environment. Again, that is a severe story. I will not tell you that every single person is that sick. What are some of the other symptoms people experience? Brain fog, chronic fatigue. For those that have never experienced chronic fatigue, you could go to sleep for 8 hours and wake up and feel like you didn't go to sleep at all. That's the type of chronic fatigue I'm talking about. Losing train of thought, gut issues, skin issues, because if you have gut issues, you most likely will have skin issues. Mold and bacteria and toxins can impact you from the dermal exposure as well, so just through the skin, not just inhalation and ingestion. So we're looking at pretty much a wide range of symptoms. Now, we also have other rare occasions like aspergillosis, where you have too much aspergillus in your environment entering your body and it infects the lung. That's a very deadly disease, unfortunately. And there's so many more really to unpack in terms of symptoms. We're still learning new things every day. If you're very interested in this subject, there are about 300 medical journals between PubMed and the NIH that you could look at. We haven't even really scratched the surface on the carcinogenic effects and the effects of mycotoxins, but there are so wide-reaching symptoms of this stuff that I think it's almost made the medical community spinning, because they don't know where to start or how to diagnose or improve this.
Yeah, they probably haven't found a pill that you can give someone that will make their mycotoxins disappear from their house.
Well, that is certainly correct.
Because obviously that would be their trail of thought, unfortunately.
Well, I'm going to go ahead and say something bold. I mean, I think the American Medical Association, for just one example, it's pretty much partnered with the pharmaceutical companies in a way where, if you go, here's how you know this is a fact, because when you look at diagnoses, every single diagnosis has a pill. It's like, if you've got symptoms X, Y, and Z, you take pill A, you take pill B. And that's the simplicity of it. Let me ask you a question. Why aren't we treating medicine, first off, personally, but also, I want to know what caused this disease to happen. I want to know what caused these symptoms to display.
Yeah.
The way in which we approach medicine, especially Western medicine, is like, if you've got a headache, you take a Tylenol. Okay. So do I have a Tylenol deficiency? No, I don't, right? There's something. Maybe I was dehydrated and I got a headache. Yeah. Maybe I ate something and my body's, there's some sort of toxin my body's processing. Maybe I had too much bacteria, right? There's lots of different things. But to just sit there and come up with a pill that provides relief without getting to the root cause of what happened in the first place, I think that is part of the ideology that stops us from thinking about air quality and the quality of water we drink and the quality of food that we eat. And I think that's really the more important thing to look at. Yeah,
for sure. For sure. I mean, just to add to that, I think we know the reason why that the medical paradigm of you have this disease, you take this, or, you will inject you with this, or we'll cut it out of the body, is because that's the best business model. Right, the medical industry aren't going to make any money for someone to test their air in their home, unless they're selling all the test kits. That is, but they're probably not going to make enough money off that, because it's generally not going to be repeat business every month like there is for most medications.
Yeah, it's unfortunate, when you're in the sick business, when you profit off people getting sick, it's tough, right? Because on one hand, you want people to feel better, but you want them to come back.
Yeah.
And I think that is a flawed business model. You're right. I actually, so to help solve this problem, I created a product called the dust test. Now, the dust test, it's available in the US. I'm working on getting it through customs throughout the rest of the world. It's a very elongated process, unfortunately. With that being said, I've partnered with over 11,000 doctors to sell the dust test so that their patients have an understanding of how their environment is impacting them. And the reason I did that is because I knew, well, doctors are business people. They sell things. It's just how it works. You come in and you're sick. I'm looking you up and down. I'm figuring out what you have. And then I'm selling you things so that you feel better. I mean, we just need to call a spade a spade. If your car isn't working right, you bring it to the mechanic. Mechanic looks over the car, sells you things to make your car better.
Yeah.
That's what we're doing.
Yeah.
So as a business person myself, I said, how do I bring doctors into the fold in a way where they can actually help people understand their environment so they can go out and fix their environment? And we did that through the dust test. And since then, partnering with all these different doctors, people are actually getting some help. And I'm not saying that doctors don't help people. I don't want to get that across. There are amazing doctors out there. But I think the reality of it is that when you talk about the general practice of doctors, right? The general system, the general practitioners, the way in which they're taught in medical school, the way in which the American Medical Association specifically holds the licensure and kind of runs the program, it's very much so this, you take these for these symptoms. And the doctors out there that are doing amazing things, they're actually going above and beyond the system. They're caring about their patients. They want to know what's actually making them sick. And they're figuring out ways to help them. And all these doctors that adopted the dust test, I mean, 11,000 doctors is not an insignificant amount of doctors. This shows us that the tide of medicine is starting to change. Doctors are starting to ask questions. And, I don't think you're going to see pharmaceutical companies go away. I think that they have, there's a benefit. If you're in pain and you need a painkiller, like I understand that. There are certain treatments that are life-saving that need to happen, right? But these are temporary fixes, right? We still need long-term solutions. And I think we're starting to see a shift there, which is an amazing thing, just like we're starting to see a shift in air quality. And so I hope that, if you're a doctor listening, you weren't offended, you're understanding, we're talking about the system in general, and, you're opening your mind to looking at ways to help people outside the box of which and the dust test and checking for air quality, that's outside the box in which and if you're a doctor and you see these stats, it's alarming. I mean, if the fact that we've never been sicker than we are today, you're a doctor and you see people and the advancements in medicine, the advancements in technology. I mean, cars are about to drive us around instead of us drive cars around. How is this possible if we don't start to change the way in which we practice medicine? We're going to keep going down this path. And who wants that?
Yeah. Sadly, quite a few of the doctors who have, questioned the paradigm. So, some that I know have actually been struck off because they actually did what was best for the patient rather than what made the most money, which is very sad, but that's the world we live in. But I suppose we can try and influence people to change one person at a time, I guess.
Yeah, they're literally yanking licenses for people.
Yeah.
You are no longer a medical doctor, your license is revoked. I think the good news is you don't necessarily need to be a medical doctor to help people. Yeah. I'm not a medical doctor. I'm helping people.
Neither am I. But I've helped many, many people over the last 3 decades.
You can take away our titles, you can't take away our pride, and you can't take away our ability to help.
Yeah.
And that's what we're here to do.
Yeah. So you mentioned the dust test. So just thinking now, people listening to this, they're thinking, oh, yeah, I've got fatigue, or I've got brain fog, or I've got skin issues. but I've tried everything else. I've changed my diet. I've helped rebalance my gut microbiome. I'm getting to bed on time. Maybe it is the air quality in my home. What options do people have to test their air quality?
All right, so this is where things get a little challenging, right? So once upon a time, this technology called air testing comes out. And air testing essentially is a little tube. It attaches to a pump. It pumps air through it. Obviously, the inlet is very tiny because it needs to capture tiny particles. So a lot of the dust that is in our air is going to be too big to fit inside this cassette and get trapped into the slide. So we really are only able to pick up isolated particles, which means that you need to be very close to where you're testing for this for it to actually show up to an abnormal level, assuming you have a source on a wall, right? Now, the problem with this technology is everybody, as soon as it comes out, it's a convenience factor, like Teflon in the pan. You don't have to scrub the pan so hard. This becomes a lot easier to do an inspection. People walk around with a pump. They got these little cassettes. They're about the size of a golf ball. They screw them onto the pump. They set up the pump in the center of the room. It runs for 5 minutes. It collects 75 milliliters of air. We're going to get back to that in a minute. Don't worry. I take that. I move it to the next room. All in all, in about an hour, you've paid me $1,000. I've taken some air samples. Everybody thinks this is the industry standard. This is the way it's done. I leave. Those cassettes go to a lab. The lab spits out some numbers. I call you back. I tell you good news. Your house is great. I've essentially had to do zero work in this scenario. This is the scenario that happens all over the world, by the way. That person goes to sleep at night thinking my house is safe. They continue to get sick because their house isn't safe because the guy didn't do an actual inspection. And here we are. I'm going to explain why all of this stuff doesn't work in a more scientific manner. First, I want to tell you a story. Client buys a house on the water in a town nearby me called St. Pete Beach. I live about 30, 40 minutes away. I'm on a consult with her. She's sensitive to mold. She's like, I want to make sure. I just bought this place. I have a little bit of fear, moving in here. I don't really feel right. Okay, so I go there. She had a home inspector. This is the person that she hired to inspect the home before they buy the home. She had a mold inspector, goes in and did exactly what I just described, by the way. Just took air samples in the center of the room, missed a bunch of things. And then after the fact, she gives me both reports. She says, I want you to come in here and take a look, make sure they didn't miss anything, and then give me a price for your company to come in and fix some of these things. All right, no problem. But we go there. I go there. I bring one of my guys who's an expert in HVAC. We're looking at the HVAC. We find problems there. Nobody caught. There's literally no drip pan underneath this HVAC machine. Like, this HVAC was not even installed up to code. It's just dripping on the floor. The whole floor now has mold. We have to open it up, right? But as I'm looking around, I take a high-powered flashlight. I start looking up in the ceilings, different areas. I'm finding water stains. I'm like, did the inspector catch this? No. Well, do you see that water stain? Yeah. Okay. Well, we need to do something about this. Lo and behold, this is still a developing story. We ended up discovering that there are one of three possibilities. When we opened up 4 corners of this house, and it reeks of mold when you open up these 4 corners of the house. We've only found so far one bay, right, that has signs of mold and water intrusion. But there is no obvious water staining down like you would expect to see. There are only 3 possibilities. Either 1, the exterior was built improperly and there's no proper vapor barrier. Number 2, the roof is leaking. It's got spray foam in the vaulted ceiling, so we actually can't see the leak. And mold's only growing because there's so much moisture coming in from the roof. 3, when they did the roof, they blocked the vent because there was a ridge vent. You could see it from Google Earth. You could see it from the way it was installed into the roof. They might have just blocked over this thing when they replaced the roof back in 2018. And it completely shut off the ventilation, which trapped moisture. And so that's a third possibility. We actually had to stop the project yesterday because we're like, well, we will be chasing a ghost unless we get more information. We need a roofer go up on the roof. We need to determine if the roof is leaking. We need somebody to come in and do more mold testing. actual mold testing. We've opened up a bunch of areas now, so there's more accessibility to do that testing. And we need to develop a scope of work because right now, this family bought a house. They can't move into it because they're sensitive to mold and it reeks of mold. And 2 days into investigation, we still don't have definitive answers of how this house is getting moldy in the first place. But we should have it by the end of this week. And all of which was missed by the home inspector, missed by the mold inspector. And if I didn't go there with a flashlight and just look and start to ask questions, why is this here? Why is that here? Why is there signs of water damage? We need to check this out. They might have moved into that house and gotten sick. And this happens, I can't count how many times. Every day I have to talk to somebody through this exact situation. They bought a house, move in, they get sick. And circling back to the technology, the air sample in the center of the room, what these guys are trying to do, they're trying to screen your house by collecting 75 milliliters of air in the center of your room. Please think about a 2-liter bottle of Coke or Pepsi for a minute. 75 milliliters of air. How many 2-liter bottles of Coke or Pepsi would it take to fill up your entire house? A lot, right? 75 milliliters of air. It's a cap full of air. And they're taking a cap full of air and they're saying, this represents the air in the entire room. Tell me, how's that possible? Now let's go back to COVID for a minute. What did we learn from COVID? You got to be about 6 feet apart, 3 to 6 feet apart. Do you want to know why that is? Because if I cough right now, these particles are very small, they're very light, they're not going to travel very far. They're going to suspend in the air. It's going to create like a cloud, right, around me. Now, those particles then attach to the dust that's already in the air. And then they'll travel further. But with that cassette technology I talked to you about, once it's attached to dust, the dust is too big to fit in the cassettes. It's not picking that up. It's only picking up the isolated spores that have opportunistically not attached to dust yet. So if I test in the center of the room, I'm going to be more than 6 feet away from the problem because the problem's never in the center of the room. It's on an exterior wall or it's on an interior wall with plumbing. And if that's the case, my samples are going to look like there's not much of an issue. I mean, you've got to be really bad in that room to detect it. So we do this room by room by room by room. We miss problems in every room. We tell people everything's good. So you know what I said? Well, if everything attaches to dust, which we know it does, and then it becomes part of our dust, what do we know about dust? It's eventually going to come to the floor, and it's going to become dust on the shelf, dust on the tables, dust on the floor. Now, if we test the dust, that would be a far better screening tool because now we can look at, well, how many particles are in each milligram of dust? And is that normal or not? Well, thankfully, the EPA and HUD did a joint study in 2006, and they continued it in 2019, where they tested roughly 1,600 homes in North America by testing the dust, using PCR technology. And within that, we're able to really understand and establish what is normal. And with that being said, launching the dust test was a way for consumers to have a better screening option. For a couple $100 instead of a couple $1,000, they can screen their home properly, get the information they need. And when I created this, said this needs to be in every doctor's office in America. And that's when we went out and created an affiliate program so that from a business perspective, this can be a part of the doctor's business, but mainly so that they can actually give people a tool that will work, that they can do on their own to get them the information. And that has been extremely powerful because now people are looking at their results and they're saying, this person said my house was fine, but I'm actually looking through PCR technology, which is DNA-based analysis. I've got some molds that are pretty elevated. And now I feel more confident being able to find somebody to help me figure out where this is coming from. Because with that, if you know you have high levels of penicillium, high levels of Stachybotrys, now you bring that to a mold inspector and say, help me find this. They're not in a position to just tell you your house is fine anymore. They've got the data that says otherwise.
Mm.
Now they're on a fact-finding mission. Where is this coming from? Changes the whole conversation, puts people back into the driver's seat.
So the dust test that you provide, is that a PCR test?
It is.
And how many different kind of microbes does that test for?
So mimicking the EPA 36, it is the 36 most likely molds to grow in a water damage environment.
Right. Gotcha.
So you're looking at 36 different molds, and you can correlate them with the different mycotoxins that molds produce. So to give you an example, if I have high levels of aspergillus inside my home by testing the dust, and I've got high levels of ochratoxin A inside my body, it makes it pretty easy to deduce, well, since that mold produces that toxin, I'm going to want to lower those mold levels, lower my exposure so that I'm being exposed to less toxins, right?
Mm.
To be clear, you can never have a mold-free or a toxin-free home. And your body is designed to remove toxins as they come into contact with the body. But, and it's a big but, that all depends on how much you're being exposed to.
Yeah.
And frankly, we are all being exposed to far more than our bodies can handle.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. So let's say someone does a test, it highlights certain molds, etc., in their home. What's the next step? What can people do to actually resolve the issue?
Yeah, so the next step is you will probably need some sort of professional involved at that point to help take that information and help you figure out where it's coming from. So, like I said, if I have high levels of aspergillus and stachybotrys, from my standpoint, when I see that, I'm going to say, well, I know stachybotrys takes 3 to 5 days to grow. I know that it requires a good amount of water. I'm looking for leaks. I'm asking the person, tell me about all the leaks that might have happened in the last few years. Because I hate to break it to you, even the leaks that you think you fixed, if you didn't remove that mold properly because you just hired a regular roofer to go fix the roof, you never opened anything up or fixed anything or removed any mold, that could still be where it is, right? If I have high levels of Aspergillus or Penicillium, I'm going to be looking at places like, does this place have a crawl space? Is there a basement? Is there an attic? Is there an HVAC system in the crawl space or basement or attic? I'm going to be looking at these things specifically first because those are the most likely candidates for that specific mold to be growing. Same thing with Penicillium. And just by asking some of the questions, I can create a plan of here's where you should test and here's why you should test there. And once we actually get to the problem, it's like a puzzle piece where you're matching the pieces, right? High levels of aspergillus in the dust. I'm testing for aspergillus and the likely locations that aspergillus would typically grow inside of a home. One of those typically pops off as this is the source, right? And you can kind of see that it'll say aspergillus will be extremely high where the source is. And we then would put a plan to remediate said source, right? And that might be, we've got some roof leaks. We got to fix the roof. We've got to remove the mold in the attic thereafter. It might be molds growing in the HVAC systems. We have to actually clean or sometimes even replace the HVAC systems depending on the age of them. We will, put together a plan to basically remove the sources, reduce the particles that those sources have created, and then look at how do we improve the home environment so this doesn't happen again. We might need dehumidifiers in a crawl space or a basement. We might need better filters on our HVAC system, something that will stop something as small as mold from getting to it. And this is kind of how we scientifically put together a plan. And then when all is said and done, we retest everything. And, I always advise just hire some other company to do the testing. You shouldn't really do the testing and remediation because it's too easy to be biased. Hire somebody else that just wants to come in and get the numbers and get the numbers accurately so we can see if we've actually made a reduction. Mm-hmm. And if you focus on this on a very scientific basis, you get some amazing results. I mean, I just talked to a friend of mine yesterday. He took the dust test. It really wasn't that bad. which is good news, but there was still some mold there. And I went over, I looked at his HVAC unit. One of his filters was covered in mold. He couldn't even believe it when I showed it to him. And since removing that filter and replacing it, since putting an air purifier in his bedroom, he ordered like really good top of the line filtration devices so that when they come in, they can get installed. I think he'll even experience even better benefits. But he said, I've been having the best sleep of my life since you did that. And, it's really interesting to see. It's like even people who aren't sick, who would consider themselves healthy, they get benefits by improving the quality of air they're breathing. I mean, he said sleep. This is the best sleep I've ever had in my life. That's amazing. And we're talking about a guy who was a 2-time Super Bowl champion, played for the NFL for, I think, 13 years. He would consider himself human performance athlete. I am, top of my game, 33 years old, right? But now he's sleeping better. I mean, so we can all learn from this and all do something and all have some benefit, whether we're sick, developing autoimmune disease or not.
Yeah, it's interesting. I had one of my earliest podcast episodes was with a guy called Tim Swackhammer. So it's a difficult name to forget. And he actually removes mold from people's homes. And he was kind of saying, it's got to be done really, really carefully and really thoroughly. Like you were alluding to, you can't just use bleach and think, oh, yeah, it's job done. So he's kind of saying the same thing as you, really, that, you've got to do a proper job. You can't just get, any old builder into it. You've got to get someone who's specialist to remove mold. Just also talking about, you spoke about an air filtration system. Are there any other things that you recommend that people could have in their homes to help clean the air?
Yeah. So if you understand what an air purifier is, essentially it's a good filter attached to a vacuum. So it draws air in, the air passes through the filter, the air should come out clean, particles trapped in the filter, and it just continuously recycles. So if you have, let's say, a central HVAC system, this is massively popular in the US. Almost everybody has a centralized HVAC system in the US. Well, then you want to put a good filter on it because it'll basically turn your HVAC system into a gigantic air purifier. Now, here's the other thing. HVAC systems all have something in common. It is an evaporative coil. And whether it does heat or cooling, it typically is going to have a heating coil and an evaporative coil. The problem with these coils specifically is that they can condensate. As a matter of fact, if air conditioning is running, I will guarantee you that it is condensating. And if we know about mold and if we know about bacteria, they need water to grow and survive. Now, if you've ever looked at the HVAC condensation line, you know what I'm talking about. All that sludge and disgusting grossness is likely bacteria. So we have a double-edged sword here, and we talked a lot about mold, but where there's mold, you will have bacteria. And if you're not sold on mold impacting your health, well, then I think you will certainly be sold on the fact that bacteria affects your health. I mean, strep or staph come to mind, anybody? With that being said, we actually have found levels of strep and levels of staph inside of water damaged homes. Very interesting stuff because it probably came out of the human beings living inside the environment. But once these particles had water damage, they can start to grow and recreate. When we look at it from this perspective, the HVAC system, which ends up being the lungs of the home, is very vulnerable. So we have mold, we have bacteria, we have viruses, all of these things, all of these microorganisms can get to the evaporative coil and start to grow and feed off of it. Now, why? Because it's got water. So it's got Earth's life source here. It can grow. And it's going to have an endless supply of food. Why is that? Because we know dust is going to bypass this filter. We know that we're human beings and we're going to forget to change our filters from time to time. So they're not going to be as effective. We know that the filter is not stopping every particle. It's stopping particularly sized particles. Even those particularly sized particles, it's not stopping 100% of the time. It might be stopping at 95% of the time. Therefore, particles bypass. The mold and bacteria growing on this evaporative coil feed off said particles. How do we know this happens? because I've tested hundreds of these things using what's called an EPA 36. Again, looking for 36 different species of mold using PCR technology, testing the coils themselves. Unfortunately, the blower wheel, which is right below the coil, also particles will emanate below and attach themselves to the blower wheel, because the blower wheel, it's a mechanical object, it's metal, and it's got oils on it to lubricate it. Well, those particles love attaching themselves to there, where they can kind of perpetuate throughout the HVAC system as well. Now, what we want to do is we want to prevent mold and bacteria from getting to the evaporative coil. We could achieve that through filtration. So good filtration on your HVAC system serves two purposes. Turns your HVAC system into an air purifier, which is great, but more importantly, it protects that coil from getting contaminated. And I think that is really where the huge benefits come into play. And so if you're, one of those people right now listening to this and you're saying, is this the filter I got to change every 3 months? Yeah, but sadly, the one you have to change every 3 months, it's not efficient enough to remove tiny particles like mold and bacteria. You've got to look at maybe upgrading to a better filtration system. And I think the benefits you will experience from that are, you wouldn't believe it.
So that's HVAC systems. What about people that don't have those? What can, like, in terms of what can people do to help, filter the air in their home?
So if you don't have an HVAC system, let's say you've got, just baseboard heaters or things of that nature, cleaning your radiators, cleaning your baseboard heaters, cleaning your steam pipes, all that stuff is going to be very helpful, because we don't clean them enough, to be honest. The second thing you want to do is you want to install air purification systems. And the trick to air purification, many people think that, the best one is the most expensive one. It's not necessarily true. Sometimes the most expensive one is just expensive because it has Wi-Fi and all these bells and whistles that you really don't even need. What you're looking for is, how small of a particle can this remove at what percentage of the time? So my goal is always to find how small of a particle can it go, and I want to see that a bit between a 95 to 99 percentile range. I know products out there that are $200 that can remove as small as 7 nanometers in particle size at 95% of the time. That's great. Now, do I need to necessarily have, 2 in every room? No. I mean, each one is going to be rated for a specific area. So you want to look at, okay, my bedroom. Well, I'm going to have my bedroom door closed a lot, especially when I'm sleeping. I might want one just for my bedroom. I spend a lot of time in my living room. I might want just one for my living room. But looking at setting up strategic places to reduce the amount of particles that are entering your body with every breath, you will notice a difference just doing that. Now, mind you, there are people listening that have issues. There are people listening that know they have mold growing on their walls. An air purifier will probably help you with some relief. But as a really good analogy, I want you to think about. If I've got an overflowing bathtub, would I start putting towels down to clean up the overflowing water before I shut off the faucet, or would I first shut off the faucet? Because if you've got something creating particles consistently, that's your overflowing bathtub. And an air purifier might just be putting down towels if you don't shut off the faucet first, which means remove the actual source creating these particles. So I want to give you the knowledge that there's really a two-part approach to this. Are there organisms growing inside my home that I could find and remove? That would be step one. Step two, how do I filter my air and keep down on these accumulation of particles? And how do I, kind of maintain and prevent these sources from becoming sources again in the future? And through that little 3-step notion, I think you can be very successful in controlling the air quality inside your home.
Over here in the UK, I don't know if it's different in the US, but Dyson is quite a very popular brand for air filters. Do you have any particular kind of opinion on Dyson air filters?
I try not to bash brands. I would say that Dyson and a few others, the common denominator is their threshold is HEPA. HEPA is a standard that was created in the 1940s. Okay. What it means is that this unit is certified that it will get down to 3 microns 98% of the time, or 95% of the time, whatever that exact standard is. 1940s. We're in 2024 right now. I think we could do better in the 80 years of advancements in technology we have. So I would argue that, I want Dyson, some of these big name companies that produce these products that are entering the marketplace because they understand and see the trend of that marketplace and it's going up. I would like them to put their money where their mouth is and develop products that go far beyond 1940 standards. And I think if we can do that, it would be very valuable. Now, of course, that requires some investment. It requires some ingenuity, but there are companies out there that are doing just that. One of the products that I mentioned can get down to 7 nanometers in particle size. That's 100 times smaller than what we're talking about with HEPA. And if we can get 100 times smaller, just like how Apple every year makes our phone just a little bit thinner, right? We should be focusing on that too. How do we get just a little bit smaller? Let's make a little bit smaller of a chip and a little bit smaller, capture a little bit smaller of a particle. And if we get there, if we push for that and we create that demand, then we're honestly going to be breathing better and better and better over time. But my issue with Dyson is you can do better, and I expect you to because of the name that you have.
Are there any brands that you would recommend?
I personally, I've been using Healthway products since about 2017. Healthway makes a compact air purifier you could plug in. It's like less than $200. Healthway also makes a whole house air purification system that ties into your HVAC system, which is one of my personal favorites because of its ability to get such a tiny particle out. And it's a great engineered product because it only causes the pressure drop of a MERV 8. So if anyone knows what a MERV rating is, it's the efficiency rating for HVAC filtration systems. It is a MERV 16 efficiency with the pressure drop of a MERV 8. That's very hard to do, and it's a really amazing piece of equipment. That's the main driver behind why I really sought them and discovered their products and have fallen in love with them. It's not to say that there are not other amazing companies out there that are competitive with the equipment that they have. But it's just my personal, the range of products that they have kind of meet every situation that I need.
Yeah. And what about things like certain house plants or even things like Himalayan salt lamps? Often they're kind of touted as being able to kind of clean the air. What are your thoughts on those?
Yeah, I mean there are certain house plants that are known to clean the air. There's some amazing information coming out with some of these other things we can do, like the Himalayan salt. There are carbon things that you can do to absorb things like VOCs. Even carbon filters. I mean, there are so many different things coming out that you could do, and I think they're all great. There's always a caveat, and so we just have to understand the caveats and understand where to place them so that they're most effective. With houseplants, the one thing I will tell you is I can't tell you how many clients have had houseplants and they've caused water damage into their floors or into their tables, and mold started to grow underneath the plant and they had no idea, simply because they're watering it and the water leaks. So you could have a whole house full of houseplants. You just have to be mindful that mold and bacteria can develop in the soil that the houseplant's planted into. It can, depending on the type of pot you use, some of the pots are porous, and that porosity can absorb moisture and allow mold to grow on the pot. Mold can certainly grow on the leaves of the plant. That's where we got the whole term mildew from. And so I would say you could do anything you want to do. You can live in a tropical climate where mold might be abundant as long as you control what you're doing. So I would say you want to get some houseplants, go for it. I love that. Just be mindful that some of these things can happen and make sure you keep an eye on it.
Yeah, awesome. So, I mean, there's another subject that probably take too long to get into it, but and I'd love to ask you about it, but I don't want to go too long on it. But one of the things that I think a lot of people are concerned about also these days in terms of air quality is what the hell are they spraying in the skies right now? I guess that's probably a whole episode on its own. But I don't know if you have any quick thoughts on that.
Yeah, it's the problem is that if they are spraying something in the sky, and I say if because there's people on both sides arguing for or against.
Yeah.
So I want to say hypothetically, if they are spraying something into the skies, we don't know what they are spraying into the skies, and that's probably the biggest mystery in terms of this, because I would imagine if they were spraying something into the sky, it would probably be some sort of chemical. And that chemical is not just going to stay in the sky, right? It would actually fall to the ground. It would, spread through air transmission, and could contaminate our water supplies, could contaminate our food supplies. Like this is not something to take lightly. I think that it's just something that for right now, we obviously need better proof that something like this is really happening by our governments, before we can really raise the alarm bells. I mean, there are people out there that are nonstop digging for proof. Good. We need to be vigilant because sometimes our scientists, they come up with crazy ideas. I mean, we've all seen the movie Oppenheimer, I've hope, right? Sometimes our scientists come up with crazy ideas. Sometimes those crazy ideas are taken and ran with without thinking of the repercussions of said crazy ideas. I'll give you a great example of this from an air quality perspective, besides the fact that Hiroshima, of course, caused massive air quality issues. But in our homes that we build today, since 1970s, and Richard Nixon was dealing with a global energy crisis, what did we do? We said we need energy efficiency, right? The whole world needs energy efficiency. What did we start doing? We started building tighter and tighter and tighter homes. Well, how does that impact human health? Well, if I have less air exchange, then I'm actually increasing the amount of particles I would be breathing with every breath.
Yeah.
Because fresh air lowers the amount of particles. That's why they say the solution to pollution is dilution. Now, we've lost our ability to dilute. We're essentially living in gigantic petri dishes today. There's hardly any ventilation. They're doing it on purpose to save energy, right? The less electric, gas we burn to keep our houses cool or hot, the better that is for the world. To me, I love that we're trying something, but it's going right back to the Teflon conversation.
Yeah.
We're doing something. We're not looking at the consequences.
Yeah.
So if they are spraying chemicals in the sky, I'm sorry, but that's stupid because we haven't considered the consequences.
Yeah.
And so I look at it from this perspective. I can't weigh in for or against. I personally haven't done my own deep dive down the rabbit hole, but I think it's brilliant that we are asking questions, because my whole career started because I asked questions. I think it's brilliant that we're asking questions, and I think it's brilliant that we are concerned and that we have questions, because if it were true, this could be a massive mistake that our governments latched onto because some scientists said, let's try this. And I think it's smart for people to question it, because the reality of it is, if our government was doing some sort of test pilot program and trying some things, they're not going to tell us about it. Not until they have more proof that their thing could work and that their thing is safe, right? And so, like I said, we obviously have not. I don't think we've passed the burden of proof on this. I think we need more proof that it's actually happening. But I think it's really intelligent that people are asking questions.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. So, what's next for you, Michael?
What's next for me? That's a great question. I'm still trying to figure that out. Well, I have a new book that's going to be coming out. When it's coming out, I can't tell you because I have no idea. It's in the hands of the publishers now. But it's a book called Never Been Sicker, How Air Quality Might Be the Missing Link for Better Health. And a lot of what I've shared with you today is going to be expounded upon in that book. And so I hope you will follow me a little bit on this journey because of the interest that you have in health and well-being since you're listening to this podcast, and you will keep an eye out for this book because I think we've done a lot of research, a lot of citations. We have done a lot of hard work trying to take all the available information out there and connect the dots. Because at the end of the day, if we're looking for our governments to save us, if we're waiting for them to ban stuff before we could feel good about making a change, we're going to continue to get sick in that process.
Yeah.
We have the ability to do our own research. We have the ability to make our own decisions. We can decide what goes in and on our body. And if we can control that, especially in our own homes, we can control the outcome that we're looking for, which is better health. And I have a nonprofit called changetheairfoundation.org. One of the biggest things that we're doing is pushing for policy reform in the United States. We have 16 bills being proposed in 16 different states. And the reason being is because we understand that this is a systemic change that's actually required for the government to pass certain laws that protect citizens, especially citizens that are living below the poverty line that don't really have the power or the ability to do something. And that's what we need. But like I said, I'm fighting for that. However, we certainly shouldn't be waiting for that fight to come to its fruition because
be too late.
It is going to take a lot of time, unfortunately. The government moves slow. I'm sure it's the same in the UK. It takes many years of getting information, giving that information to government leaders, and then grasping those leaders' attention in between a very short amount of time before they have to worry about campaigning for the next election cycle.
Yeah.
And that's tough.
Yeah.
But that's how it works.
Yeah. And is there anywhere else that people can find you online?
Yeah. So you could find me if you go to homecleanse.com, especially if you're you need services or products to figure out how to improve the quality of air you're breathing. That is the place to go for you. You can go to themichaelrubino.com if you wanted to connect with me one-on-one or see all the things I'm doing out there. That's a great space. And then if you're really interested in getting involved and helping to change the quality of air we're breathing systemically, please go to changetheairfoundation.org.
Awesome. Michael, thank you so much for your time today. Thank you for sharing, some really informative and important information with my listeners today. But thank you very much.
Yeah, and thank you for having this platform. I mean, it is incredibly important. People need information on how to improve their health, and thank you for having me on to be able to support that.
Yeah, my pleasure. So that's all from Michael and me for this week. But don't forget to join me the same time, same place next week on the Radical Health Rebel podcast. Thanks for tuning in. Remember to give the show a rating and a review, and I'll see you next time.